Welcome everybody. My name is Hugh. I am the head of training in the UK for LOXONE. I'm also the partner coach for the UK for LOXONE, as well as various other hats that I wear in LOXONE in the UK. We are an international company. We operate in loads and loads of countries. We are a whole building automation solution, whether that be smart homes, whether that be BMS systems in offices, industrial applications, whatever it may be. Thank you for joining. This is going to be a webinar showing you a practical layout and installation of LOXONE. It will hopefully take around about an hour. I've tried to streamline it as much as possible. I had a trial run where I had nothing wired up beforehand and it just took too long. And to be honest, I would expect that all of you know how to use a screwdriver, so I don't want to teach you how to suck eggs. So instead, we're going to look at already pre-wired board, but we are going to get opportunities to look at various different wiring applications. I have got a screwdriver ready just in case I need one. So yeah, all in all, it should hopefully last about an hour. So yeah, so for anyone just joining in, yeah, my name's Hugh, LOXONE, about an hour, there we go. Now, for most of this presentation, it will be camera only. So you'll get a nice big screen showing what I'm working on. I've got obviously this wide angle camera that I'll be working on initially, and then I do have another camera that I will move over to get a closer up of certain things that we're looking at. I will at some points also be sharing my screen so that you can take a look at configuration as well. When I share my screen, the camera will go to a small image in the top right. If you need that camera image to be bigger and you want to change the ratio on Zoom, you can just drag it to change it. I've also already mentioned, but just in case anyone has just joined, if you have any questions throughout, please use the Q&A feature. So on Zoom at the bottom, next to the chat, there is a Q&A feature. Please ping any questions over there. The reason being is I won't actually get an opportunity to answer them while I'm doing the presentation because I'll lose my trail of thought. But at the very end, I will answer all of your questions. And if they're in the Q&A, I can tick them off once they're answered. All righty. So I'm just going to share my screen just to show you a quick slide before we get started. So welcome to our live home automation installation webinar. I've already done the intro, so that's already out of the way. For anyone who is eagle-eyed, you've probably seen behind me what we're going to work on. I would love to walk you around a building site and show you screwing things to walls, but to be honest, it doesn't really suit a purpose. You guys know what that's like. And my missus didn't like the idea of me tearing our house apart to show you things there as well. So what I have is the next best thing. We are going to go back to school and we are going to be working on a whiteboard. This whiteboard is going to be a little bit different to what we're used to though. I've got a whiteboard prepared with everything we're going to need to look at. So we're going to have an overview of that demo wall. Now, I should probably just preempt that this webinar is obviously designed for people looking to become automation installers. Therefore, there will be from my point of view, I will expect everybody to know at least electrical theory, if not be trained and qualified electricians. So I will mention certain concepts throughout, certain technical concepts, things like voltage drop, things like power triangles, that I just kind of have to assume that you guys know what they mean. So yeah, so we'll look at demo wall overview. What I'll do is I'll have the camera angles, we'll look through the various different bits on the board, talk through the different things that are on there. I will screw a few things in together, show you the terminal blocks, show you the terminations, and then once it is all wired up behind me, we will then plug it in, configure it, and get it working. Sound good? Brilliant. So I'm going to stop showing my screen for the time being, just so that we're on this camera angle, and without further ado, let's get this show on the road. All righty. So here I have a pre-made wall, as I said, a whiteboard, to give you an idea of how a LOXONE system could be wired and physically installed. So one of the big things to bear in mind with LOXONE is that we have built ourselves as a complete building automation solution. So what that means is that we can do lighting, heating, security, shading, multi-room audio, energy management, as well as a myriad of other things. Basically, if you want to control it and automate it, we can probably do it. To do that, there are different ways of doing it. I'm just going to try and move that camera up a touch just so my head isn't cut off. Oh, that didn't work. Never mind. So there are different ways of doing it. For anyone with a little bit of automation experience, so who's done other styles of automation or smart home system, you may be familiar with ways of doing it where you will typically have keypads that will either be addressable keypads, and by keypads I mean switches, where you have to either daisy chain all of the keypads together, so a single chain going from one to the next, to the next, to the next, or you have to star wire, so all of the keypads back individually to the panel. You may also be familiar with other automation systems that when it comes to things like lighting wiring and lighting cabling, then typically, because you'd be controlling mains lights, every circuit of lights that you want to control has to individually come back as a radial back to the panel. So what that can turn out in, and even just a fairly small house, this is actually based off a 3-bed semi-detached house, is very, very large panels. We've all seen those pictures of those giant communications racks throughout buildings just to do a little bit of lighting. Now, you can do all of that with LOXONE. It's absolutely possible to do mains lighting with LOXONE. We also support DALI, we also support DMX, we also support 0 to 10 and 1 to 10 volt dimming as well. So we support the lot. But we also have our own in-house system called Tree. And Tree is what we're going to be focusing on today. Because as I said, this panel, which in the center here, kind of from here down to here, is our example of our LOXONE panel. That is the control center for the house. This is a 3-bedroom semi-detached house. Lighting, heating, security, access control. And it's pretty small. If we were to do this with all third-party components, but with LOXONE hardware controlling it, we would be looking at doubling, if not tripling, the size of that panel. So there is the beauty of LOXONE. So as I said, from here down to about here is our panel. So what I've done is, obviously this would normally be in a metal enclosure. I have, much like a Michelin-starred chef, deconstructed it so that we can see it all broken apart and how every bit of it goes together and works. So let's start by explaining it. Let's go for this DIN rail to start with. And don't worry, for all the terminations, I have another camera that I will bring around to show you close up. But on this DIN rail, we have the LOXONE hardware. So these bits here are our hardware, our extensions. The first of those, the green box, is the mini server. The mini server is the brains of any LOXONE system. This is the thing that makes all of the decisions. And then these black boxes here are extensions. Extensions get added onto the mini server to give you extra functionality, because the mini server comes with a number of inputs and outputs to begin with. But if you need things like DMX, like DALI, like RS485, or you need more relays, for example, you just add extensions. And you just keep adding extensions for all of the extra things you need to do. So it is very modular and very flexible. So big green box is the mini server, that is the brains. Every system has one. The way that LOXONE works, the way that automation in general works, is what we are essentially doing is we are reading inputs. Inputs are anything that gives us information. So for instance, a PIR, motion sensor, that would be an input. A switch would be an input. Regardless of whether they're LOXONE or third party, they are inputs. Door contact would also be an input. So an input is something that gives us information. The mini server has no way of controlling what state it's in. The mini server can't say whether there's motion or not. It's me moving that does that. The mini server merely reads this. And what the mini server then does after it's read this information is, based on how you've configured it, chooses how to control outputs. Outputs are things that are then controlled. So some examples of outputs would be lights, like this tree spot, which will be going in that hole there. Another example of an output may be a relay, a switch to trigger a boiler, for instance, or to open an electronic door lock. All of those things would be outputs. So inputs give us information, outputs are then controlled, and the mini server sits in the middle to do all of these things. The mini server has a network connection, but this is a really cool thing about LOXONE. Because this is essentially the brains of the system, that connection there, that Ethernet connection, is really only necessary for the app. And what we will see when we get onto configuration is the app isn't necessary day to day. The app is a nice to have rather than a daily necessity. So if the internet goes down, if you decide to unplug that cable, no big deal. House continues working perfectly. And then we have a few extensions. So as I've already mentioned, we're going to be looking at a system that is based off our Tree technology. LOXONE Tree is a communications bus where every device communicates over a two-core connection, which is known as Tree. Now, the beautiful thing about Tree is you can have up to 50 devices communicating to a single branch of Tree up to a total cable length of 500 meters with a completely open wiring topology. So you no longer have to daisy chain. You no longer have to star wire everything. You can do any topology you want. The only one it can't be is a ring. So I could, for instance, cable from the mini server out to a motion sensor or a presence sensor in a room that's a Tree version. I could then from that do a switch drop down the wall to a switch. I could then from the same presence sensor spur off in three different directions to Tree spots within that room. I could then tap off one of those Tree spots and move on to another room and do things in there as well. And every one of these devices is individually addressable. So we can read and control each one individually, even though they're all on the same cable. It is an amazing system. And this is how we can get such small panels and such easy installations. Now, as I said, you can connect up to 50 Tree devices per Tree branch. The mini server itself contains a branch, but we obviously do have a certain recommendation of breakdown. We will get onto that when I move the camera over. Further on from that, the top DIN rail of said panel, we have some terminal blocks. These terminal blocks are used for distributing what we need from inside the panel out to the outgoing cables. We have an example here of 3 outbound cables. When we get into the close-up, I will explain what these different outbound cables are there for. We obviously recommend some level of redundancy and breakup of circuits and of cables so that there's no single point of failure. We also, on this same DIN rail, have several power supplies. So again, we recommend breaking up power supplies so that you don't have a single point of failure. As an example, on this installation, we have 2 10-amp power supplies. So everything LOXONE is 24 volt DC. Everything that we run, all of our hardware in the panel and all of our peripherals, including our light fittings, are 24 volt DC. So we have 2 10-amp power supplies, which will give us a total of 480 watts for lighting. This is for LOXONE lighting. This would be for LED strip, for LOXONE tree spots, for LOXONE ceiling lights. These particular power supplies can be paralleled together. Parallels means that we can take basically the positive and the negative from both power supplies, link both the positives together and both the negatives together to give a single 20 amp output, a single 480 watt output, rather than having to break our loads up between them. So that's exactly what we're doing here. 2 10 amp power supplies, both of the positives are then linked into some fused terminal blocks. We have then got a cross connector that we will link across these terminal blocks to link them all together. Of course, however, the cables outbound may not have a current carrying capacity of 20 amps. So what we then do is fuse each of the positive outbound cables to its current carrying capacity. Again, when we get the camera in, we'll look in more detail. We then have 2 more power supplies. This power supply here is a 30 watt power supply. That is for powering peripherals. By peripherals, we mean Tree light switches, Tree presence sensors, Tree valve actuators for heating. So all of the peripheral devices outside of the panel that are not lighting is powered by this power supply. And then finally, we have a Diddler 10 watt power supply. This one is for powering the mini server and the connected extensions. So 3 chunks of power supplies, 1 for lighting, 1 for peripherals, 1 for panel hardware. Excellent. And then moving over here, as I said already, terminal blocks we'll look at in a second. And then the final thing, or the final two things on the far out shot. The first of those is this. For anyone who may have been looking at this and going, what is that? Or going, that looks awfully like a neutral bar. The answer is, it is. It's a commoning bar. So this is true of most DC systems, regardless of whether it's LOXONE or others. If you have multiple power supplies on the same system, and you have things that can link between two devices on two separate power supplies, you have a potential problem of potential difference, because no power supply is ever going to be perfectly 24 volts. And also, they may have different ground references. So let's say that this chunk of power supplies that powers this tree spot over here is actually at 23 volts. Whereas this power supply that powers the mini server is actually at 25 volts. So there could be a potential difference there of 2 or 3 volts. And at the moment, the only thing linking the spot with the mini server is the tree communications, that 2-wire bus connector, which is obviously the last place that we want to introduce unwanted voltage, because it will then interfere with communications. So what we've done is we've taken a common bar and we've taken the ground, the 0 volt DC from every single power supply up to the commoning bar to common them all together. And that will then cancel out any potential difference. And then we've gone back out from the commoning bar to our outbound circuits. And then finally on the wide angle shot, down here, we have an underfloor heating manifold. And that is an example of LOXONE tree actuators. They go on every part of the manifold, and just take a look at that cabling and how easy that is compared to having a bunch of mains actuators on there that you'd have to get a cable back to a relay from each one. Massive reduction in cabling. One outbound cable, and then it's a punch down connector, one of these, and it is just pop, 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 pop on all of the cores all the way along, just like it is. Over here, we have an example of a room. So we have a light switch, we have a presence sensor, and this is where we get onto LOXONE and what we like to do with components. We don't like the idea of having one product that does one thing. We like to provide as much functionality in one device as we can. So this LOXONE presence sensor actually detects motion, brightness, and acoustic signals. So that could be used to automate your lighting, for example, to bring lights on automatically, but it could just as easily be used for your burglar alarm system or to extend your heating period. This LOXONE switch here, as well as doing lighting, which is in the center, you can also control your music from the right-hand side and your shading from the left-hand side. So multiple uses from one switch. And if that wasn't enough, it also contains a built-in temperature and humidity sensor. So straight away on a LOXONE system, no thermostat required. Get rid of them, unneeded. And then over here would be the tree spot. So that would be an example of a room. That would be an example of an underfloor heating manifold. And then finally over here, this is our outside. So this is an NFC code touch, which is our keypad option. That reads NFC tags, and you can also type in codes. And this hopefully, now that I've explained the 3 different areas, so over here we have our room, down here we have our underfloor heating, and over here we have outside, hopefully it's starting to explain the cabling layouts. Because what we recommend as LOXONE, when it comes to branches of tree, is we recommend a tree branch per floor of the house. So for instance, this is a 3-bed semi-detached house. So it would have an upstairs and a downstairs. We would recommend 1 branch of tree for downstairs. We would recommend 1 branch of tree for upstairs. We would also recommend 1 branch of tree for heating components, and then 1 branch of tree for external components. So that nice breakdown. Wonderful. Now that we've got that sorted, let's move the other camera around. And let's take a closer look. All right, let's try and get this in a good angle. There we go. That looks pretty good. All right, just let that focus for a second. Perfect. So back to the main panel equipment. Mini server here. Network ports on the top. SD card. SD card contains all of the operating system for the mini server. We also have some digital inputs, which is this green connector block on the mini server. That is for third-party inputs such as door contacts. We also have some analog inputs. They could be used for things like an external third-party brightness sensor. At the bottom of the mini server, we have these red terminal blocks here. Those are relays, volt-free relays. A relay is just a basic switch. Wherever we stick in one leg, comes back out the other. For example, that could be 12 volt, 24 volt, mains supports the lot up to 10 amps. And then the last things on the mini server to talk about are these 3 push-in connectors at the bottom. The orange-white is our 24 volt DC power. So that is powering the mini server. The blue-white is the LOXONE link. The LOXONE link is what connects the mini server with its extensions. So you can see here that what we've done is we have looped the power. It's time to get my screwdriver out. We've looped the power from the mini server across to the first, the second, and then the third extension. So there we go, power sorted. And I just missed that terminal actually when I screwed it up. See, this is what all the prep in the world, and then a touch of nerves and you miss a screw hole. There we go, so power linked across. Then the LOXONE link goes from the mini server to one extension to the next to the next. LOXONE link must be wired in a bus, so it has to be wired from one to the next to the next. And again, just connect that at the ends. And then the last extension in line gets a 120 ohm resistor as well, which comes in the box with the mini server. Oh, I've done it again. There we go. All right, excellent. Now, this is obviously an example of a panel. One thing to bear in mind, you will see that all of our tree cables, and I'll explain tree cable in a second, but we've terminated them into a terminal block along the top. We haven't floated them all the way through the panel. The reason being is that this could very, very easily be a mixed voltage panel. So this could very easily have mains around this panel as well. So we want to make sure that any cable that doesn't have an insulation rating of mains doesn't go beyond this point here. So that's why all of these outbound cables to the various rooms and various areas terminate at the top. And then from the bottom, we're using either tri-rated cable, or these ones here and the blue here are panel wire. There's a couple of manufacturers that make them, but they are rated to, I believe, 415 volts. So they meet the right insulation ratings to be used in a mixed voltage panel. All right, so that's the link done. That's the power done. Last connector here on the mini server, this one here is a tree branch. So this is what we're talking about with one branch of tree. That connector there can have up to 50 devices connected to it. When I say 50 devices, I mean obviously communications rather than power. And you can see that we're taking some panel wire up to one of the terminal blocks here. Now, this is the beauty, again, with using terminal blocks. For low power peripherals, things like switches and sensors, you don't really need to worry. You could wire a single cable across an entire floor and you're probably not going to suffer enough volt drop to actually affect these. But of course, if you've got lighting products, LOXONE lighting products, which are 24 volt DC on that cable run as well, that is potentially 0.3 amps per spot, per downlight. That could obviously suffer from voltage drop. As a general rule of thumb, you can normally get about 15 to 20 fittings per one of these cables. So that obviously means that on a single floor of a building like this 3-bedroom semi-detached house, we might actually need a couple of radials per floor to do our lighting as well. But that doesn't mean that we have to all of a sudden take all of those different cores down into the panel. If all of them were going to go on that tree branch, then all we have to do is take the twisted pair up to the first terminal block, and then just like we've done with the power there, just loop across them. So just loops across all the terminal blocks, very, very easy distribution. And then moving on from our mini server, we then have 3 more extensions in this system. We have 2 more tree extensions. The reason being is, as I said, we recommend a tree branch per floor, +1 for the underfloor heating, +1 for outside. This system as a total will have 1 tree branch for the ground floor, 1 for the first floor, 1 for the outside, and 1 for the underfloor heating. So we will need a total of 4 tree branches. There is 1 branch on the mini server, and every tree extension has 2 branches, which again, you can see there terminated, branch 1, branch 2, and then on a second tree extension, some more panel wires. These are push-in connectors. So all we do is we strip off a little bit of copper on the ends, and you simply just go push. So push and push. Done. That's now terminated. Reason for push-in connectors is they're maintenance free. So that is now sorted. And then the final extension on the DIN rail is an airbase extension. That speaks to our wireless devices. Reason for that is that you're usually going to have a mixed system. You will probably have 1 or 2 bits of wireless floating around the place. Perfect. Moving 1 step up. 2 10-amp power supplies. As I said, these have then gone into a set of fused terminal blocks. Because we want to parallel these power supplies, we are going to take a cross connector and we are going to cross connect all of those fused terminal blocks. Then from here, we have a 1.5mm tri-rated core out from each fused terminal blocks to the corresponding pin on these terminal blocks here. And then as you'll see, I've only put a fuse in one of the cables. That's because only one of these outbound cables actually requires the high voltage power to power the light fittings. The other 2 do not. And then as we've already gone over, these power supplies here, 1 for peripherals, 1 for mini server and extensions. Alrighty, then we move over to the blue terminal blocks. These are known as separated terminal blocks. And this is when we start to talk about cabling for LOXONE. Now for LOXONE tree, we actually make our own cable called the tree cable. This is a combined cable that allows you to do LOXONE lighting, LOXONE peripherals, and all of your tree data on a single cable. So what we have is we have a twisted pair green. And you can see that one is already terminated into a push-in terminal, one of those push-in Wagos that we have on the back of our devices. That is your tree communications. There is then also a twisted pair orange. As such, that twisted pair orange is for power for low-powered devices, such as switches, presence sensors, and valve actuators on a heating system. And then finally, there are 2 1.5mm cores. These are for higher powered devices, such as light fittings. So light fitting on the 1.5s, sensors and switches on the twisted pair, but all of them get the greens, which is the tree communication. And then what we've got is we have our tree cables that come from various parts of the house back to these terminal blocks. And these are levels of the connectors. So there are 8 levels on these connector, and each of the levels corresponds to the opposing side. So for instance, this one here, which is the first terminal, corresponds to the first terminal here on the other side. So what we've done is at the back, don't know if it's quite visible, the green and green white from the tree cable, from each of these tree cables has been terminated into the back layers, the back 2 layers, 7 and 8. The 1.5mm here have been terminated into levels 4 and 3. Only reason I've skipped a couple of levels is just because of personal preference. So the 1.5 is then terminated into 4 and 3. And then finally, the twisted pair for the power terminated into 1 and 2. And these are just push connectors. So screwdriver, see if I can do that at an angle where people can actually see. Screwdriver, push in, and then take the core and push the core into the connection, let go, done. So then that's the twisted pair power, the orange and orange white into pins 1 and 2. And on the opposing side, what we've done is, as I said, we are using this power supply for the peripherals. So we are taking the positive here that you can see, this red core, that is going in to the first of the terminal blocks. Now, because this power supply is more than man enough to do all of the peripherals in the house, we have simply just looped across all of the terminals for the orange core. Then we are doing exactly the same for the ground. So we have the black core from here, from the commoning block, to the second pin of the blue terminals, and again, just looped across. For the 1.5 mils, however, we obviously want to give them an individual feed, which is what I'm doing from these fused terminal blocks. So the red 1.5 mil into pin 3, pin 4, again, 4 of them up to the commoning bar, and then down at the bottom, I've got my green and green white for the various tree communications. If this were this real 3-bedroom semi-detached house I was talking about, there would probably be a total of 6 outbound cables. There would probably be a total of 2 tree cables per floor. So ground floor and first floor would give us 4 cables. We would then have a separate cable for outside, 5, and then a separate cable for the underfloor heating manifold, 6. So there'd probably be 6 outbound cables. So there'd be 2 more of these blue terminal blocks. You can see the panel wouldn't get any bigger. And then all we would do from the relevant tree branch is just hop across to the next cable that needs it. Don't have to put it down each time. All right, wonderful. Then we get onto the wiring of the stuff. So I've already wired up the keypad that's over there. The reason that's already wired up is just because they're single push-in connectors on the keypad on the NFC Code Touch. They're not designed to be removed. That's obviously because it's an externally rated device. However, over on this stuff over here, this is stuff still to terminate. So if I just take the presence sensor off and the switch off, you can see nothing is terminated in yet. Now, as I said with tree, it is a free-form wiring topology. So whichever device you start with is entirely up to you. Normally, I would have a back box, a circular Euro back box behind this presence sensor, and I would have a back box behind this switch. The reason I don't is because I burnt my drill out when I drilled this hole. So I very simply just did a little hole because I didn't want to completely ruin my drill and not be able to get any holes whatsoever. So I've chosen to start at my spot. So I've gone from this terminal block here, or rather, sorry, the second one. So this cable here goes out through the back there and then comes out of the spot hole here. And it is this cable. And so what I've done is I've just put some Wagos on all of the corresponding cores. Don't have to take it to the spot first. You can take it to any device first that you want. So this is my cable that goes back to the panel. Then I'm going to need a cable over to the presence sensor. Now, I don't need the 1.5 mils to the presence sensor. So if I just pop this through, there is my cable going from the spot to the presence sensor. And what I've done, because I don't need those 1.5 mils, it's entirely up to you and your best practice. You can snip them off. You can put them in a couple of extra Wagos. What I've done personally is, because I've made sure that they're unfused anyway, so there's no power on them, I have heat shrinked them back. So all I've got left for the presence sensor is the green, white and orange, white twisted pairs. And again, at this end, those are the only ones here that I've terminated as well. So again, on both sides, the 1.5 mils are just heat shrunk back. Then we have our push-in connectors, green, white, push the green into the green, and then the white into the white. And it's done. Same for the orange. My hands are getting a bit sweaty from the nerves. And then on the orange, again, exactly the same. Orange into orange and white into white. Can go into any of the 4 levels. So you've got actually 4 different connectors. So you could push up to 4 different cores in there if you wanted. Once those are terminated, we take our presence sensor, and on the back of the presence sensor is where they go. So they just slot onto those pins. So green, white, onto there, orange, white, onto there. There we go. Device is now terminated. Cable back through. Find the teeth. There they are. Twist. Presence sensor terminated. I'll do the spot last. So then we have our cable going down to the switch. And again, I have just done some heat shrink on the 1.5s because again, on the switch, I only need the twisted pairs. So those are the only ones I've terminated. So heat shrink on the 1.5s and exactly as before, green, white. So you'll see that we standardize connectors as well. So green into green. Green, white into white. And then same for the orange connectors. Orange into orange. Oh, that one's been used before. Orange into orange. Orange, white into orange, white. There we go. All terminated. Grab your switch and exactly the same on the back. You push the orange, white and orange, white on there. Like that. And then the green and the green, white on there. Switch is now terminated. Last thing, clip it onto the back plate and it's done. And then the final bit to terminate here, tree spot. Tree spot exactly the same. You've got cores for power. So red and white this time for power, and then green and green, white for the data. And you can see there's a stripe on the green, white. So this time we don't need the twisted pair, orange and orange, white. We only need the 1.5 mils and the 2 green cores. So what we do is we put the 1.5 mil orange to the red. We put the white to the orange, white. We put the green, white to the green, white. And finally, we put the green to the green. Done. Get that through. Clamps, pull back. Mind my fingers because it's like a mouse trap. And there we go, spot terminated. So that is a spot, a presence sensor, and a touch pure terminated with a little bit of nerves in a grand total of 6 minutes. Not bad, eh? And this is actually now our panel completely wired up. We have lighting, we have security, we have heating, we have access control, all sorted in this panel. Now that all of that is done, big moment of truth. Let's power it up. So I'll move this camera back out of the way and let's get her powered. Whew, look at that. So mini server is just powering up now. You can see at the moment, devices are flashing red. Red is nothing to worry about at this point in time. Red normally means that there's a wiring fault, but they'll be red until the mini server completely starts up. Once the mini server's finished starting up, they should, fingers crossed, if I wired everything properly, flash orange. Orange is then a good sign. Orange means that they are online and that they are successfully connected to a tree extension, but they have not been learnt in yet. And look at that, now that it's finished starting up, you can see all the extensions are flashing orange, the presence sensor's flashing orange. We can't see it, but there is a light on the back of the switch, which is flashing orange, and the keypad is also flashing orange as well. And I don't know if you can quite see it, but the top of the valve actuators are also orange. Orange is excellent. Orange means that we are ready to start configuring this system up. So let's get moving with that. So let's share our screen. Once we've shared the screen, we are going to open up LOXONE Config. LOXONE Config is our configuration software for making this all work. I've just seen a question come through that said, I originally said 1 tree cable per floor, then I said 2 tree cables per floor, which one? Slight misunderstanding there. It's as many tree cables as are needed for the voltage drop of the components that you're doing. It's 1 tree branch per floor. So there's a difference between a branch for communications versus cabling runs for power. So in this instance, it's 1 branch per floor because we're under 50 devices per floor, but it would be 2 cable runs per floor because we've got lots of tree spots, and therefore we need to work out the voltage drop on them. All right, so once I'm in config, I then open up or create a project file, which is what this is here. I've just got one ready. This is a blank config file. So this is ready to go. Parameters, over on the left-hand side is the nitty-gritty stuff. Everything in the middle is the components I have to configure with, and everything on the right-hand side is my configuration, which, as you can see, currently there is nothing there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to search for that mini server, and there we go, it shows up. If I then select it, I'll only show this once or twice, but you should hopefully just be, no, it doesn't do it at this point. I made a mistake. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Sorry, jumping ahead. So I'm going to select that mini server there. I'm going to put in the username and password and press connect. There we go. I am now connected to this mini server. Once I've connected to this mini server, I need to first of all get those extensions paired in. To do that, select the mini server, and at the top here, extension search. And there we have it, 3 extensions showing up. First of all, I select one of the tree extensions. Once I select an extension in this list here, you can see there, it starts flashing rapidly in the panel. So everything identifies itself to you as you select it. So if you have multiples of the same extension, you don't have to write down serial numbers beforehand. They identify themselves to you. So back to config, we will add in that tree extension, add in that one, and add in the Airbase extension. Done. Save in mini server. So every time you make a change, you save in mini server, and that saves the changes in. What will happen now is when that reboots, they flash green. So everything flashing green, all good, all healthy. Now the extensions are in, let's start adding in those tree devices. To do that, we just select one of the tree branches, and at the top, tree device search. Oh, look at that. Everything just showing up. That's beautiful, isn't it? So everything here on the left-hand side is devices it can see. Everything on the right-hand side is devices that are currently added. And this is another beautiful thing with LOXONE is, again, no need to write down individual serial numbers each time just to get things to work. All you need to do is select one of these things, and then in the real world, that particular device will start identifying itself to you. Quite hard to see there with the light on the whiteboard, but that spot is actually flashing. So it's identifying itself to me. So what I do is I can say that this goes in a particular room. I can say that it goes in a particular place. I can even give it a name itself if I would like to. And then I add it in. For something like an NFC code touch, that flashes. So you can see there, it's flashing to identify itself. I actually accidentally just pressed it. It also clicks at you. So the NFC code touch, that would go outside, and that would be by the front door. Add it in. The presence sensor, again, flashes rapidly at you, red, green, to identify that that's the one you've selected. So everything is identifying itself to me. This is a massive time saver. So that can go in the living room, on the ceiling. Oh, no, not ceiling lights. Once that's done, add it in. And the touch pure, so any touch switches, if you can hear that, click at you. So again, a way of identification. And that will go over by the door. Valve actuators, again, when you select them, they start rapidly flashing. I don't think you'll be able to see it because of where the position of the valve actuators are. So you'll just have to believe me on that one. What I'll do for the valve actuators is I'm only going to learn in one of them just to save us a little bit of time, because learning in one is exactly the same as learning in four. So we'll learn in one of those valve actuators, learn them all in, press save. Once you have all saved in, what will then happen is things like presence sensors and NFC code touches will actually stop flashing altogether. That's because they're now paired in. And we are ready to start configuring. So I've already mentioned that LOXONE is inputs and outputs. Inputs give us information, outputs things we control. So for instance, on lighting, a switch would be an input. Presence sensor would be an input. Brightness would be an input, because obviously we don't want the lights on when it's already bright enough in the room. To make all of those things actually intelligent, because inputs are just dumb, they just give us information. Something has to sit in the middle to take all those inputs and make intelligent decisions for them. And those things are called function blocks. So function blocks, for example, for lighting, allow us to then make this system clever. So we could put in a lighting controller there. On the left-hand side, we have parameters to adjust all of the nitty-gritty settings, things like timeouts and how bright the room has to be before lights stop getting brought on automatically. We can adjust all of these. We can also create ourselves templates to save us a little bit of time, which is what I have done here, just because otherwise I'm going to bore you all with just adjusting a mind-numbing number of parameters. Then we take our, for instance, presence sensor, and we can stick brightness on that lighting controller. We can take our switch and stick that on there. We could take our ceiling lights and we can stick that on there. And the Touch Pure, that switch, even has a backlight on it that we can also use as part of our lighting system. We can also use something like the presence block to say when we are currently present within a room. So we can link our presence sensor in there. And we can also assign things like timers and overruns. And then that can also be linked to our lighting controller. So we have a switch, we have a brightness sensor, and we have our presence sensor. We can also say what rooms all of this stuff lives in. So we can say all of this is for the living room, and that's lighting configured. Once we've done lighting, we could move on to something like heating. So for heating, we have a couple of blocks this time. We have something like the intelligent room controller, which controls heating within a room. So this would be in the living room. It would take the temperature in the room. This, again, can take from the switch. So you can see here under the Touch Pure, there is a temperature input. We can put that in there. So we're reading the temperature in a room. And then from that, we can control a valve actuator. So we then have somewhere over here, where did it go? There it is, valve actuator tree, and that would be the output to the intelligent room controller. So it's reading the temperature in a room based on what we have set here, which again, I've got a template for. We'll decide how to heat up or cool down that room. We then also have to trigger our boiler. So as well as opening the valve, we also have to turn our boiler on, and maybe things like pumps and zone valves as well. So we have another function block for that, this time called the climate controller. So we would take out our climate controller. We would say that it is linked to that room. So you can see they're now linked together because it says there with a little green bar. And then once that's done, we could take maybe one of those relays from the mini server and say that actually that relay is our boiler trigger. And then we could assign that to there. So that will then turn on our boiler when there is a call for heat in this room. That's lighting, that's heating. Let's move on to something like access control. So access control is from the NFC code touch. So we could maybe drag that out, and it might even do the function block for us. And there it is. So that would be our front door access. We could double click in here and add ourselves a user. I could throw myself in there, and I could give myself a code of maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and say that I can get in for an unlimited period of time. Okay, that. Again, probably want to open a door, so we could have a second relay that would be for our front door lock. that would then go on there. So we've now got lighting, we've now got heating, and we've got access control. Final thing to worry about in this house would probably be a burglar alarm, an intruder alarm. So again, we've got a function block for that called the burglar alarm block. So we could chuck that in there. And when we do, you can see that you can automatically link things like switches clicking and lights flashing, music going off if we had a music system as output. So things that happen when the burglar alarm goes off. And you can tie in things like your motion sensor as an input. And so there's a burglar alarm block. Again, I've got myself a nice template to use for the parameters. And we now have a burglar alarm system. But this is then when automation and LOXONE becomes magical. Because at the moment, the only thing in this entire system that's really automated is the lighting. When I walk into a room, it will automatically turn lights on for me, provided the lighting in the room is dim enough currently. But that's really the only automation. Heating will manage itself, but that's about it. But what if I want to do some cleverer stuff, like maybe have, as I'm leaving the house, a way of turning everything off and arming the burglar alarm? And as I'm coming back home and typing my code in the keypad to unlock my door, maybe turning the burglar alarm back off. This is then when LOXONE and the beauty of config comes in, because we can then start doing some more custom things, some little bit more complex stuff, if I could spell, with having maybe something like a switch block. A switch block is just dead simple. Give it one input, it closes, give it another input, opens back up again. And this switch block could be there to decide whether we are currently in the house or not. So we could call this maybe our all-out switch. And in LOXONE, our recommendation is that a double tap from a switch in any room turns that room off, but a triple tap in a room that you leave the house from turns the house off. So let's say that we leave the house from that room. Okay, lighting controller. Oh, there's an output here. Outputs a pulse when a triple click is detected. Wonderful. So we could take that to somewhere like this switch block to turn it on. And then what we could do is, after that, we could say, okay, that's turning the switch block on, but what about turning the switch block back off again? So O turns it on and R turns it off. So if a triple click says that we've left the house, maybe when we type our code in the front door, that says that we've arrived back home. So we could then link our front door keypad to turn this block back off again. And then we could say, well, what do we actually want to happen when we arrive home and leave home? Well, we could say that when we leave the house, we probably want all of our heating schedules to go back to default in case we've done any overrides. We may also want to arm our burglar alarm, which we can do down there. We may then, on the flip side, when we arrive back home, maybe we want to turn off our burglar alarm. And maybe we even, when we arrive back home, want to also turn on some lights. And we can do all of that as well. And I know I've blasted past that a little bit, but you can see on the screen there, that is lighting, heating, security, and access control. And there is not really that much there. And once I've done all that, well, what I can do then is save it in. And then what we'll do is, once that's finished saving, I'm going to turn off this light so that we can see this board in a little bit more detail. And let's see what happens. We've got lights. Amazing. So we now have a configured system. Look at that. That is beautiful. So we have a configured system. We have some lighting working. We also, from config, have the power of checking why the lights didn't come on automatically for me. So I could start something called live view and see what may have been the reason that the lights didn't come on automatically. And the most likely reason is, you can see that currently is saying there is no presence in the room. So something going on there, probably that I accidentally disconnected the power when I twisted it in because I was in a bit of a faff. But we can see switch is working, turning lights on and off. If we go a little bit down here, we can see that the room is currently 25.6 degrees, so there's no need for heating. And we can see various other things happening on the system as well. Now, the absolute beauty with this is while doing that little bit of config, that will also mean that I have a working app. So look at this, rooms, and I've got my living room, I've got my outside and my whole house. If I go into the living room, there's the heating in the living room and there's the lighting. So all of that is already working. If I go into the lighting here, those are the two moods that I have available. So again, if you're on Zoom Live, you will be able to drag out the picture of the camera to get it nice and big. But you will see there switching between those two moods. You can see that light coming on and off. But the app is designed for the customer. Customer may want more than just lights on and off. So I can also press more down here. And once I have pressed more, I then have the ability of actually sliding up and down to change the exact brightness within the room. So look at that, brightness up and brightness down. Well, that's nice, isn't it? The other cool thing about LOXONE fittings, our own light fittings, if I press on the name of it, they are fully color changing. So I can select an exact color that I want to go to, maybe a nice purple. And again, I can change the brightness up and down. Probably quite hard to see because I'm in quite a bright room. But if I stop my share as well, so it's a nice big picture, you can just see there, purple, purple going down a bit. Beautiful. And then if I select maybe red, oh, no, that wasn't red, red, green, blue, and you can see all of those changes happen. So you can see how quickly it happens as well. It is nigh on instant. So really, really quick changes. What we can also do from here, if I go to maybe purple, is once I've chosen the color and the brightness that I like, I can then actually save this mood. And I can actually create this as a new mood. And I could call this maybe my entertaining mood. Press the tick, and that's now saved in. The beautiful thing here is as soon as it is saved in, it's on the switch. Look at that, bright, off, entertaining. Bright, off, entertaining. So your customer has the ability to create, to change, to edit all of the moods themselves very, very simply. I can even change the order that these moods appear in the list. So I can change which order they go in on the switch as well, all from the app, no configuration required. And then on the whole house settings, see, this is where we get to see whether my presence sensor is working with my wiring. If I go into maybe the alarm category, there's my burglar alarm. Now, as I said, I've configured a triple click to leave the house. Let's try it out. Look at that. Turn the lights off, and it's arming the burglar alarm. Burglar alarm will arm after a few seconds. How long it takes is entirely configurable. Alarm arms, there we go. And I've set it off by walking in front of the motion sensor. And you can hear that the switch is clicking. So that's the silent alarm. After it does the silent phase, it then does an audible phase, which would be our music system and our external sounder going off. Then visual stage, lights in the house start flashing, the blinds will start lifting up, the entire house will be going haywire. So you can see there, haywire house, lights flashing, switches clicking, blinds are lifting up. Whoever is in that house should be running for the hills now. As the homeowner, I come back home, type in my code. Oh, type it in correctly. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Press tick. And you can see there, alarm stops going off as well. So by me having successful access, you can see that the alarm is disarmed. And remember, I also got it to turn on lights for us when I walked back in as well. So my lights are now on as well to my preferred mood. And there we have it, a full LOXONE app, burglar alarm. We have our heating, we have our lighting, we have just about everything we need in this house. Configured, new record for me in about 8 minutes. And then back on config, and look at that. absolute thing of beauty. All righty, everyone. And in fact, I've hit 1 hour on the dot as well. So look at that. Even my timings were correct. So there we have it. There is a very, very quick, I know that I went through at a fair old pace of knots. I didn't want to keep you here all evening, but hopefully it's given you a bit of an insight into the wiring of LOXONE and also a little bit of the configuration of LOXONE. I have recorded this session, so get in touch with us if you would like to go over it or take a look at it again. And then just to finish up on a couple of slides from me, let me just resize my own windows. So there we go. So we had the intro, we've done the demo wall, we've done the live installation and configuration and the demonstration. We will end with a Q&A, but before we get onto the Q&A, if anyone is interested in doing more with LOXONE, if anyone has looked at this and gone, wow, there's a lot of clever stuff that LOXONE can do, even if it's just, wow, I can do purple lights in my house. We can do everything. And I say that, honestly, I have not come across a situation I haven't been able to do with LOXONE yet. We can be a full BMS system for a commercial building. We can be a complete smart home ecosystem. We can even manage processes. I did one not so long ago where I helped a partner develop an automated call to prayer in a mosque based on solar, based on elevation of the sun in the sky. So it really is incredibly flexible. We have 2 things to do to become a LOXONE partner if you are in the trade. That is to get a welcome pack, which is a demo case, and to attend our training course. The training course you'll need the welcome pack for, but if you would just like to get started with the welcome pack to play around with it in your own time, just get in touch with us. Those are the 2 links. Otherwise, call us up, send us an email, whatever. We will be happy to help and happy to discuss with you. And then the final thing from us, oh, there you go. We'll find out more about becoming a partner by going to loxone.com/install. And then the final bit here will be Q&A session. So for as many questions as you guys have, I will spend as long as it requires to answer them, even if I'm here all evening. All right, so let's get on to the Q&As.